Now, as promised, I have a voicemail today that I think has broken the record for the number of strawman arguments made in it. And not only that, but they're also incredibly offensive. So I'm going to spend this commentary dissecting that voicemail because kind of the whole purpose of this discussion on veganism has not so much been to discuss the merits of each argument, but to dissect the arguments themselves and to discuss kind of how people are talking to each other and how people are framing their arguments. Like that's what I find personally most interesting. If I could change one thing about the conversation, it would be the tone of it rather than just putting my thumb on one side. Although one person wrote in and said, hey, you were saying something that sounded really biased in this conversation and you weren't sounding neutral, to which I responded, when did I ever say that I was neutral in this conversation? Like, I think the arguments against meat eating are more correct than the arguments for it. That said, that's not really the point of going through all this. So the voicemail we're going to hear is from Daryl. He not only has the prestigious honor of breaking this record, as I just described, he also started this entire conversation. He was the first person to call in. He was speaking out against Citizen Radio based on their, veganism views and how they talked about it. And so we all have him to thank for all of this. Thanks, Daryl. First, I'm going to play a clip from a previous voicemail. He sent this in a couple of months ago, just to give you a frame of reference of where he's coming from, and I'll pick it up after that.
If someone comes and tries to make a law, pass a law that says you cannot be vegan, I'm going to fight alongside of you. I think you have a right to do that. Just like I hope you'll fight alongside of me to have the right to eat the kind of food that I eat because, that's what I want to do. I'm not going out and stealing cattle or anything. I mean, if that's what you guys are assuming.
Okay, so there you go. In context, what he says is that this is the core of his argument. And, so this is, it's okay for me to have picked it out of context. That is, that's the entirety of what he said in his argument. And he said, this is really the point that I want to get across, is what he just said. And so, his argument is based on an incredibly flawed assumption. And it's not the only one. In fact, like, just for a second, did you hear what he said at the end? He's like, it's not like I'm stealing, the cattle, if that's what you're assuming. It's like, what? Wait, what? Where did that come from? Anyways, the real basis of his assumption is he has this crazy idea, and I don't mean to call him crazy. I just mean, like, I don't know where he got this idea that vegans want to legislate away the rights to eat meat. They want to prohibit the right to eat meat. And I don't know where he got this idea, but he's not the only one. Other people have called in or sent me messages or emails or whatever, and it's this kind of prevalent idea of, hey, don't tell me what I am and am not allowed to eat. And my thought is, who did? All these people, they're just trying to sway you with their arguments. They're just trying to encourage you to do what they think is right. Of every vegan I've ever spoken to or heard from, none of them, 0 people have ever suggested that we should legislate away the right to eat meat. In fact, the people who started all this, Citizen Radio, they have specifically addressed this. They say, of course we wouldn't ever try to ban it. That's crazy. Prohibition doesn't work. It doesn't work for drugs. It doesn't work for, alcohol back, when we tried that. Like, it just flat out doesn't work. Why in the world would we try to do it with meat? People would still eat meat. There would just be meat gangsters, So literally, Daryl got on this idea by listening to Citizen Radio, and then the conversation has continued with voicemailers into this show. And of all, that collection of people, none of them have suggested what he's implying they've suggested. So he starts with an incredibly flawed premise, which of course leads him down an incredibly flawed set of logic. Now, I mean, if his premise was right, I'd agree with his conclusions. So it's not like he's an illogical guy who like comes to the wrong conclusions. He just started with the wrong premise. And now he really picks up steam in his next voicemail that he just left like within the last week or so.
Oh, Jade, this is Daryl calling from California, and I was calling to weigh in on the vegan issue. I guess I started this whole thing long ago when I mentioned that Citizens Radio, they kind of
come down on people who eat meat because it's wrong and all these things. And I've been listening to some of the calls, and all I can say is, wow, that last caller on the last show, he got a little angry, but I think he was pretty close to being on the mark. I look at the vegan issue in the same way I look at the hard religious right who tell you, you can't have abortion can't have services at family planning clinics. Let's put it that way. Same people who are like the American Taliban. I would say the vegans on the left are the Taliban on the right. They're equal to.
So for now, he's just continuing on with the same flawed premise. And now he's getting a little bit offensive, comparing to the American Taliban, who we all recognize as the religious right, and those trying to actively legislate away, women's rights, or gay rights, and so on. So again, the comparison completely falls apart because there are no vegans trying to legislate any version of their morality onto anyone else. It's about to pick up, though, and he's going to change courses a little bit and get even more interesting.
This is a country where, if you go back a couple hundred years, you could buy and sell people. They put in the Constitution. They made a certain person 3/5 of a person, so they weren't a person. You could buy and sell that person. And if you were a slave and you ran away, you were hanged. You were killed. They're oftentimes beaten. If you stole a horse in this country, the person who stole the horse was hanged. They have valued animals above people in this country for years, and this is another example of that same type of belief system.
So I literally have no idea how slavery got brought into this. I don't even know the point he was trying to make, but I'm pretty sure that I should be offended by it. Moving on, though, he also brought up horse thieves and tried to say that because horse thieves 100 or 200 years ago were put to death for their crime, that was putting higher value on animal life than human life. And I say that makes no sense at all. The horses were simply property, and that just means it was an incredibly high penalty for the crime of robbery. Now, jumping forward into the present day, again, I've still never heard a single vegan hold animals at a higher level than humans, to put more value on the life of an animal than a human. I've simply never heard it. Again, I'm sure they're out there. I just don't know who they are. And so I don't know how you base any argument on the assumption that anyone is making that argument.
I eat meat. There's no vegan or vegetarian who could really convince me with any real reasons why I shouldn't eat meat. I'm not going to let some right winger tell me that rich people should not be taxed fairly. I'm not going to let some right winger tell me that a woman doesn't have a right to make a decision on abortion for herself. I don't want people telling people that you can, and this is the exact same thing as telling a woman you can't have an abortion, and you can't eat meat.
So I already explained why the comparison with abortion simply doesn't work. At best, it's just urging someone to please not have an abortion with no threat of legislation to back it up. I think the much more apt comparison is with energy consumption. I mean, there are like 15 totally separate and different and very valid reasons to not eat meat, but just from my background, the one I like the most is energy. And so I think the better comparison is, hey, I'm not trying to tell you that you can't drive a car, but can I try to convince you to get one with better mileage? That's really all it is. And I'm not going to ban the use of combustion engines, but I'm going to make the argument that we should use less of them.
I've been eating meat for thousands of years. I know this is, doesn't help with the empathy side. But if we were to look at the fact in this country that people have placed animals above people, literally in this country that has happened, and we continue to look at it that way, or some people do, I think that's a problem. And that's not one that we're going to be able to figure out on a show like this. I think people just need to step back and look at your own life and probably let's deal with our own lives And if my life infringes upon your rights, if what I do infringes upon your rights, then I'm wrong. That's probably what should be taken from this. Empathy is one thing, but what's right and what's wrong? And I don't think people will care if what I do doesn't infringe upon your rights, but it goes against something that you've chosen to believe. The right-wing extremists feel the same way. They should be the ones who make the rules. Maybe the vegans should, the people who want to push veganism should look at that. Dale from California, just my 2 cents. It'll probably spark up another firestorm, but I think people need to look at the whole picture and look at what we're saying. I think when you put animals above people again in this country, we're not looking down the historical path and taking into account what really happened here. All right, thank you.
So that's where he finishes up. And, I'll say again, if I thought any of his premises were correct, I would probably also agree with his conclusions. I just don't know where he got those incredibly wrong premises to begin with. So, all of this started because I did a commentary on empathy, more recently it started. And my idea is that vegans and meat-eating brains simply work differently. Like we're hardwired to be various degrees of empathetic, because there are people who can, watch one of those videos of, they're like trying to butcher a cow and they're trying to kill it, but it didn't die right away and it struggled, just like you can see something like that and you're just like horrified, and you can swear off meat from that moment forward and it lasts the rest of your life. And then there are a lot of people who can see a video like that and be like, oh, that's terrible, and then go have a hamburger and disassociate. And so, my point really is to just get people to speak differently based on the fact that, we can understand each other a little bit better. So if you're, vegan or vegetarian out there, telling someone that meat is murder isn't going to get you very far, because the people you're talking to and trying to convince can probably completely disassociate those two things. And so if you're trying to make the argument, come to people where they are. For me, it's energy. For whatever reason, I don't have that hypercharged, empathetic cog in my brain. And so for me, tapping into something I care about more in terms of, fixing climate change and moving to a clean energy economy and whatnot, like that's what speaks to me. Now, the flip side for meat eaters, I get the irritation of being told that something you've been doing your whole life is wrong. If you can be convinced that what you've been doing your whole life is wrong, I mean, it can be traumatizing. Just ask anyone who grew up religious for the first several decades of their life and then realized it was bullshit and became an atheist. Like, it's traumatizing. So, I get the emotional connection to, this is what I do, this is what I've always done, and don't tell me I'm wrong for it. You don't have to go so far as to accuse the other side of trying to, steal the meat out of your hand. They're not doing it. You sound like a guy saying, Obama's coming for my guns. He's not coming for your guns. Don't worry about it. It's not happening. So, these people, they're trying to convince you of something, but they're not coming after you. If the problem you have with them is their tone, because they're calling you a murderer, well, then you just heard me. I'm on your side. I'm trying to get everyone to tone it down. We can all make our arguments without being dicks about it. And now the last thing, because this came up a couple of times, several people have mentioned that vegans or vegetarians are essentially like the religious right. And so hold that in your mind for a second. And do you remember the one guy who I got mad at? He called in, he said, how do you know that plants don't have feelings? He might as well have been saying, how do you know that evolution exists? And how do you know the world isn't only 6,000 years old? I mean, the point he was actually making was actually a vaguely interesting and rather nuanced one, but he was doing it in a terrible way. I actually get that there's a gigantic sliding scale. For the sake of argument, let's say that humans are at the pinnacle of creation and a single-celled organism is at the bottom. And there's a lot of gray area between the two, and where people put the line of what consciousness is or what sentiency is, and what's ethical to what collection of molecules is it ethical to destroy, and which isn't. Like, I get that that's an interesting, nuanced point, but for anyone to say, based on the degree of scientific knowledge that we have now, that you might as well equate a cow with a blade of grass because there's some information that's come out recently that says that plants can have some sort of sensory mechanism that allows chemical reactions to happen that makes them appear to be reacting to their surroundings. And that's basically the same as having a brain and a spinal cord and a nervous system. There's a gray area, but those two things are so far apart, it's comical. So if you find yourself making that argument, you should probably stop. And in a more broad sense, if you find yourself having an extremely strong opinion on either side of this argument, just be aware how easy it is for you to express that opinion and come off sounding like a complete tool.